Now we're going to have a freewheeling discussion and question period up here, and maybe if you could put the mics between you, you can both speak into the mic and speak up. And I'd like to introduce our panel. On the end here we have on the extreme right, we have our dear friend General Clyde Watts, whom you've already met. And secondly, we have Professor Charles Rice of Notre Dame Law School. And over here we have Senator C.R. Lewis from Alaska. And my first husband, Fred Schlafly. Maybe I should say my legal husband. You've all met them before, so I won't take time to tell you how great they are, but you know that's what I think. Now, fire away.
Can I have a question,
Yes,
Phyllis?
right.
Is this mic hooked in?
Yes, it is.
No. Well, I got my start calling hogs. I guess I don't need it. Phyllis, from your inspiring presentation, I recognize two vital life and death problems that face our country today. Number one, we are defenseless. Number two, we are bankrupt. The question now is, do you think we will find the solution to either of these two problems by chasing water bugs?
Well, that's a very sophisticated question, Clyde. It's true that the whole media and the government seems to be paralyzed with Watergate at the present time. I don't know whether that's a bad idea. They do so much damage when they're functioning that maybe it's better that they're not functioning for a while. The same way at the state legislative level, a lot of people want to keep those state legislatures in session for a longer period. I think we're better off if they're not in session for a good deal of the year. Charlie, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, what's your feeling about the 76 elections, Phyllis, in connection with this whole thing?
Oh, well, now I didn't know we were going to get into things like that. About the 76 election.
Repeat the question.
The question is, I think they can hear on the mic. Can you hear on these mics? No? Yes, yes. My feeling about the 76 election. The thing about politics is you just never know what's going to happen. That is really, my remarks about keeping the quality of hope bear very appropriately on this subject. If you look back over the last few years, who could possibly have guessed some of the things that would happen, such as the assassination attempts, the Chappaquiddick, Lyndon Johnson pulling out at the height of his power. You just don't know what can happen. And I think it's kind of like the person who wrote in one time to Ann Landers and said, how do I, let's see, how can I be a success in this world? And she said, you have to take advantage of your opportunities. And I think the person wrote back and said, well, how do I know my opportunities when I see them? And she said, well, for most people, opportunities are disguised as hard work, and they don't recognize it. And I think that's very true. You work along, and we hope that we're going to have an opportunity, that something's going to happen. You've got to be there to take advantage of it. There are, of course, lots of maneuverings going on at the present time. Some people will tell you that almost surely one person or another is going to be the nominee of one party or the other. I don't know whether anybody really knows. I don't think they do. I think anything can happen. But I do believe in some kind of political action that you find out whatever is most appropriate for you and your circumstance and get busy and do that. Don't give up. Don't you? Have you got some answer? You wouldn't ask a question like that if you haven't got some answer for it.
No, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I was really curious because I don't know. I voted for Nixon in 1960, and never again since. It just seems to me that we've got a problem here, that you have a fundamental disinclination on the part of the U.S. government to regard the enemy even as an adversary. And you've got a problem where the biggest support for the entire communist enterprise over the past 50 years has come from the United States government. I wonder exactly what the posture should be if we get another candidate who will say the same things that Nixon said in 1968, 1972, and then turn around and do exactly the opposite. I mean, it is a real problem. My own inclination is switch to Schmitz in 76. I'm not trying to provoke the thing prematurely, Phyllis, because I know that circumstances change and you never know what is going to happen in the next 3 years. I just think we have to start thinking in that direction.
Well, you point out a real problem in that a lot of the people you and I deal with are volunteers, and they become disillusioned when they see what happens. And they work in electing what they think is a good guy, and he turns out to be all wrong. And it's too bad. But to show you the conservative strength, in 1968 in Miami, the conservatives had so much strength that they were able to be divided between Nixon and Reagan and still get their man in. And still, the Rockefeller did not have a chance of getting the nomination. Now that shows you how much power we had in our hands, and somehow it slipped away, probably because of wrong decisions there. But it did show you the feeling even among the delegates who were at that convention. So there are a number of different ways that we can go. I hope you'll all go one of those ways, so that when we're there, when the opportunity arises, we're able to zero in on it. Senator Lewis.
As I was listening to your speech, a very excellent one, I might say, I recalled a remark by Tom Anderson. He said the Russians would never drop an atomic bomb on Washington. They'd get too many of their own men. Also, I recall that somebody said that Rockefeller went to Moscow and fired Khrushchev, and I think the whole thing indicates that there's a real treasonous nest of snakes in Washington, and I wonder if it'd be any advantage to us to develop military superiority with the type of people that we have in there, if we don't have to clean out, make a thorough house cleaning from bottom to top in Washington, D.C.
Well, that's a very, very good question, and I'm certainly for the thorough house cleaning, and will assist in that in any possible way. But even if you have the good guys, if you don't have the weapons, there's nothing they can do about it. So I think they're all part of the same picture. You're right that it wouldn't be enough to have the weapon if you don't have the will to use it, and somebody who would use it in behalf of the United States of America. That is certainly very true. But it's also possible that you could have a good guy, but he hasn't got the weapons.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm all for having the weapons. I'm wondering how we're going to get the weapons with the present people that we have in Washington. I wonder how we're going to do it.
Well, I believe that you can bring changes in people who are in office for pragmatic reasons, if not for good reasons. And I think there are a lot of good examples of how grassroots effort have forced people in Washington to change their views. Now, a look at the number of congressmen who have completely reversed field on the subject of busing in Congress. The last busing vote that came up in the United States Congress, there were about 35 hardcore liberal congressmen who had voted for busing every opportunity they got over years, who just couldn't get there fast enough to line up and vote against busing. Now this is because they heard from the people at the grassroots level. About a year ago I was in Washington one weekend, and it came out in the Washington papers that the Soviet embassy had bought a 1,000-acre tract of land adjacent to Mount Vernon. And the people in the neighborhood had visions of setting up the command headquarters right there next to Mount Vernon. They went into action, and by 2 o'clock the next afternoon, the State Department announced that the Soviet embassy would not be permitted to buy that land. I think we had a very dramatic illustration just a couple of weeks ago when the Watergate hearings went on. Now, the Watergate, of course, the press is fascinated with Watergate, and when these urban hearings started, they were televising in full on the 3 networks. Apparently, this didn't sit well with the American people, and they had so many calls going in that within 48 hours, the networks got together and had a little powwow and decided, well, we'll alternate NBC one day, and ABC the next, and CBS the next. Now, this was we kind of almost took their fun away. They were planning on devoting the whole thing to it. And in response to public pressure, they said, well, we'll cut 2/3 of it out. And there are examples of what you can do. Some of those people down there, we can't turn them into good guys, but they, to a certain extent, are responsive to public pressure. And I just think we've got to zero in on them. Now, I believe this food issue is a great issue to zero in on them, because this is something which affects everybody. And I hope you're all going to subscribe to the Phyllis Schlafly report at $5 a year. You've got a sample out there on the table, a little envelope, and you can subscribe. My last issue describes this whole issue of food. I think this is something that affects everybody. And if you make everybody realize that that extra 30 cents a pound that you're paying on a pound of beef is caused by the administration sending soybeans to the Soviet Union, you'll get some kind of response, and get it fast.
Phyllis, would you comment on the fact that in October of 1968, then candidate Nixon made a very strong statement in a public address for strategic superiority. Those are the words that he used. We must have not parity, but strategic superiority. And then to the arms negotiation pact for SALT, he appointed, and I don't think this is generally known, he appointed as our negotiators Harold Brown, who had been in the Pentagon for some 4 years under McNamara and helped disarm the Air Force and refused to go ahead with the new weapons like the Skybolt and the B-1 and so forth. And he also appointed to this key SALT negotiating team Paul Nitze, who had been Deputy Secretary of Defense under McNamara and had done his part in killing other weapons and refusing to build the weapons we needed just to stay even with the Soviet Union. Now, why in the world would Nixon appoint those 2 people when he, under no reason to do so? They were not Republicans. There was no possible reason for politically that he would gain by appointing those people to this important team.
Well, you're right, of course, in saying that Nixon, in his campaign of 1968, made an unequivocal promise to restore our nuclear superiority, to end the McNamara policies, and to rebuild the defense of our country. And immediately when he went into office, he reneged on that. He transferred Paul Nitze from the Pentagon to the SALT team. Paul Nitze was the chief architect and theoretician of the McNamara policy of dismantling the defense of our country. He's a very brilliant man, and he was been the brains of the SALT team and the strong man on that team which produced the terrible treaties of last year. And Harold Brown had been Secretary of the Air Force under McNamara. Of course, Nixon also immediately appointed Kissinger, who adopted the McNamara policies under the cover of this word sufficiency. Now, if you're looking for motivation, well, I don't know. We could speculate on the motives. And I have speculated. Those of you who've read my book, Strike from Space, which is on sale out here, and a later book called The Betrayers, I did speculate on the motives of why these people are doing this, and it takes a little longer to explain than we have here. But actually, if you walk out in front of the Statler Hilton and somebody shoots you, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference whether he is your friend trying to save you from somebody hitting you over the back of your head with a hammer, or whether he mistook you for somebody else, or whether it was a complete accident, he just thought the gun wasn't loaded, or something else. What difference does it really make if you're dead? And so as to why they're doing this, you and I can speculate. There's no question but that Kissinger is the man who is setting the policies. The policy of doing nothing to rebuild the defense of our country, the policy of acquiescing in Soviet superiority, and the policy of what I call the carrot. That is, he is trying to offer Brezhnev the goodies of the American free enterprise system, our food, our technology, our computers, our trade, and to say, we'll give you some of these goodies if you please won't use the power that we know you have. Now, maybe Kissinger is sincerely convinced of this. I don't know. Maybe Nixon has got so many other problems he has to take what Kissinger tells him. I think that policy is doomed to defeat, because when you start paying off a blackmailer, he always ups the price. And if the Soviets just want $1 billion worth of grain last year, they're going to want more this year and the next year, and pretty soon we might be paying a very substantial sum of our gross national product, and maybe even that wouldn't be enough. Back to you, Clyde.
Back to me, I guess, Phyllis. Phyllis, do you really feel that an entertainment-oriented society devoted to the pursuit of happiness has a reservoir of remaining capability to comprehend the sacrifices necessary for life and liberty?
Well, that is a real problem. With a lot of the people we know, they're either thinking about a vacation in Florida, or they're thinking about propping themselves up with a bottle of beer in front of television. This is a big percentage of the people. But I would say that in fighting this Equal Rights Amendment this year, this has been a dramatic illustration of how decisions are made by just a handful of people. That whole thing got where it was going by just a handful of women, not anywhere near as many as in this room. And it was stopped by an equally small number of women. Now, if you can do it with something like that, you can do it with other things too. It is a very small number of people who make the decisions and decide the policies. And the big majority of people are fence sitters. They're going to go along with whoever side they think is winning. And if we can demonstrate the leadership and the policies that are right, we can get all those great masses who just like to sit in front of television.
Oh, say, Phyllis, incidentally, something I was about to forget. In a water-saturated period of our time, we have a very, very great friend of both yours and myself, a TWA flight captain, Captain Robert Addicks. Bob, would you stand up? As a special precaution for Watergate and the area of Massachusetts where you're now located, Captain Addicks has flown in special passenger TWA, of which he is a flight captain, to request me to present to you a waterproof Teddy Kennedy watch. So...
Thank you very much, Bob and Clyde. They say a lot of Democrats would like to climb on the Teddy Kennedy bandwagon if they were sure he weren't driving it. And I'm not going to go in an automobile ride with him. Professor Rice, you're a great authority on politics in addition to constitutional law, abortion, and many other subjects, because you work in the Conservative Party in New York State. Haven't you got some suggestions and words of wisdom from your experience?
Suggestions? I don't know about words of wisdom. I would take slight exception with one comment you made, and that was that you said that Rockefeller lost the '68 nomination. I don't think he lost it. I think he won it. And I think that what...
I'll stand corrected.
No. I think what has happened is you have the president in there now who is really I think, an errand boy for a clique, and it is something that just has to be changed. And I really do not think that there is any indication of a real, or there is indication rather, of an identity of interest among those in our government who are supposedly negotiating on our behalf and the people who are supposed to be our enemies. And it's something that has to be changed. There's no sense concealing it. This trade that John Schmitz has pointed out, trade to the enemies, with the enemies, the aid to the enemy, the entire course of the past 3 or 4 years in a non-technical sense is simply treasonable. I think it has to be considered to be such, and I am delighted to see the force and the detail with which you're presenting this issue, because the defense, and particularly the food issue, offer opportunities to finally get people squared away to realize that this thing is really hitting them. And we're not going to do it just by talking in a vacuum. We're going to do it by doing the kind of thing that you're doing, Phyllis, and that is to present the facts, to show people that this is robbery, that their higher prices are due to the fact that we are subsidizing the enemy, incidentally, that has been and continues to kill American people. Now, I have a problem in that I have to make a connection at 11 o'clock. It's not a Chinese connection or a French connection, but I have to make a connection at 11 o'clock. And I will have to bug out on you at this point. But please, if you can, pick up some of the material that Phyllis was talking about. One of the great failings here is the failure to simply appreciate the magnitude of the problem that she is talking about, and the actual factual detail of what I consider to be a great betrayal of American interests. But you have to see the facts, you have to see them in black and white, and she has done it, and I am very happy to have had the opportunity to be with you and with the other members of the panel on this, and I particularly am grateful for the opportunity to participate in this, my first, and I hope not my last, New England rally. And it's I want to thank Mrs. McKinney and Colonel Bunker for giving me the opportunity to be here. I wish you well, and God bless you, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rice. We're very honored to have you here today, and wish you well at Notre Dame, and hope you turn out some fine lawyers who are going to counteract all the lawyers who are going into legal aid turned out by all the other law schools. I'm glad he mentioned again this issue of food, and somehow we've got to keep in mind the large area that we're talking about as zeroed in on what you can do about it. And that's why I've emphasized this food thing, because I think it relates to people in your daily lives and something that you can take action on right now. Now, I broke this food issue with my first CBS commentary that was on the network on the 4th of June. I know that from friends who've reported to me that it was reported on at the White House briefing that morning. This was all news to them. And you may have noticed since then this matter of food is on the news every day. There's something morning and evening on food, not only on prices, but about the shipments, the shortages, the coming shortages, and all that sort of thing. Following my initial blast on it on the CBS network, I held a women's summit conference on food in St. Louis, where I brought in women leaders from 10 states around the country. We held a press conference that had national press, and subsequent to that we went down to Washington and delivered my transcript of the press conference and my position paper on food to every one of the 535 senators and congressmen. We had very good response to this. And it was done in the nature of demanding an investigation to tie this whole issue of food together the Soviet wheat deal, the high prices we're all grumbling about in our stores, the shipments to the Soviet Union, the stealing of our fish, the tying up of our ships and railroad cars, all into the same package. And I would ask if you would write to your senators and congressmen and tell them to consider this whole matter of food and the potential that it has for peace and freedom throughout the country. Those of you who get my newsletter will get a copy of it, and it's something that's immediate. It's right now. It's got tremendous potential for our cause. I might say on these CBS commentaries, I am now doing regular radio and television commentaries on CBS Network, the series called Spectrum. That is, I do 2 radios per week and 1 television on the CBS Morning News every 9 days. So I hope if you catch any of them, you'll write to CBS in care of your local CBS station and tell them you liked it and ask for a copy of the script. That will help. Now, Senator Lewis.
Phyllis, your husband and I are having a little trouble understanding the professor over on this side. Maybe I'll repeat what he said, but anyway, an army travels on a stomach, Napoleon said many years ago. It seems to me that the people who gave this food, the totally influential people in the administration who arranged this wheat deal, giving it to Russia and signed the SALT treaties and did everything that you've mentioned doing, are equally as interested in Soviet superiority as Khrushchev and Brezhnev, which, as far as I'm concerned, is treason. And I'd like to know if you think this is true, and if it is, specifically, how do we best inform the public of this very serious charge?
Well, on the matter of informing the public, I think we just have to go at it at the grassroots level and at the media level, like the people did on busing. You know, you got to talk about it. You've got to make people understand and realize that that our security and our freedom depends on our superiority, and it's been given away. Most people don't realize that we're second best, as publicly proclaimed by the SALT Treaty. It just hasn't percolated through. There are these few documentaries that I mentioned on this subject on television have mostly been shown. Well, we watched one of them that was shown between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm sure I was the only one who was watching it. You have to keep at it. Most people, you're right, they don't relate to those nuclear missiles. They're too far away and they don't see. But the food they can. And I think you've got to keep hammering away. Would you like to give an answer to your own question?
No, I'd like to ask for an answer to the first part of the question. Am I right that they're equally as interested in Soviet superiority as Khrushchev and Brezhnev, or are they just misinformed presidents and senators?
Human motivation is a very complex thing, and they have different reasons. As far as your average senator and congressman, he doesn't understand the subject any more than anybody in this audience. All he wants to do is be reelected. And he's just solving the daily problems that come into his office, and he hasn't, for the most part, he hasn't even thought about it. He's wondering what he's going to vote about on the bill that's today and answering the letters from his constituent, and is he going to be reelected. Now, in regard to the people making the decisions, that's something else again. No, they're not stupid. They're very smart people. And in my books, I have spelled this out as to what I think their motives are. Some of them are truly world government people. They really want to get us in a world government. They talk about convergence with the Soviet Union, and they think that world would be nicer if we'd get a little more like the Soviets, and the Soviets would get a little more like us, and we'd all be happy together in one big world government. That's the motivation of some of them. The ones whom I think have been calling the shots in the nuclear field, as represented particularly by Paul Nitze, are the people who have taken the position that the Soviets have the determination to control the world. And they're going to achieve that goal because they have the dictatorial system that they can pour their resources and energy into it. And that we, with our democratic system, can't match them. Now, when they first started putting this out in the war colleges of our country in the 1950s, late 50s, I thought it was a ridiculous motivation and point of view. But as you look back on the history of our country since '58, it has happened exactly as they speculated at that time, namely that the Soviets would put the money and energy into building weapons, and the United States would give up because we're more interested in other things, apathetic, don't care, don't like weapons anyway. And it's happened that way. But they made that decision early, and they made it thinking that the Soviets are going to win anyway. Therefore, let's make our deal with them. And let's try to buy them off from this with some of the goodies of the American free enterprise system. So they want to give them all these goodies in this illusion that if we can improve their consumer goods and give them more computers and make them more efficient and productive, maybe they'll like us. And maybe they won't use the power that they've got. Now, of course, I don't believe it's going to happen that way because there's no known instance where a communist was willing to sacrifice his ideology for material goods. They go after control, and they don't care how many people they kill or how much they spend to achieve their goal. And so I think that the Nitsa policies are the Nitsa-Kissinger policies are doomed to defeat. And the trouble is we're all going to have to pay with our lives and freedom for their mistake. And I don't know any way to go except to improve public information, to keep hitting at it, and maybe we can change the policy as we did in some other issues, such as busing. Yeah.
Phyllis, may I comment on the Senator's statement there, because I think it is very true. What Senator Lewis was telling us is that there are very powerful forces in this country that do not want to see anything evil happen to the Soviet Union. They do not want to see that form of government go out of power. And you just look through history and you can see that every time the Soviet Union has been in trouble, powerful forces in this country have bailed them out. You start right in with at the time of the revolution in 1917, it was every interest of this country to keep the Tsar, or Kerensky government, I'll put it, the Kerensky government in power, because they were fighting the Germans, and we wanted to fight the Germans. But nevertheless, forces in this country raised the money, sent Trotsky over to the Soviet Union, financed him so that he could overthrow the Kerensky government and stop fighting the Germans. That was the first instance of it. Then, of course, there was the time when they had a great famine there in 1922, and the Hoover Relief Mission with American money fed and bailed the Soviet Union out. The complete failure then. They would have starved to death. The system would have gone under. It happened again of course, when Hitler invaded Russia, Senator Truman made, I think, a very true statement. He said that, Harry Truman said that, well, this is the best thing that ever happened. And if we see that Hitler is going to lose out to the Soviet Union, maybe we ought to give Hitler a little help. And if we see the Soviet Union is going to lose to Hitler, give the Soviet Union a little help. Let them both fight till they're completely exhausted and done for. Finest thing that happened, but that policy didn't last. In a very short time, before we got into war, the Congress was jammed through Congress a Lend-Lease aid, giving Lend-Lease aid to the Soviet Union, which was not an ally of ours. Japan hadn't attacked us. There was no reason why we should bail them out. But that was done. Then when Stalin died, it was a great opportunity. They had no means of succession there, and revolt immediately broke out in East Germany and all along the borders there. And we immediately recognized the successors of Stalin there as a legitimate government, and that opportunity, which would have flamed in revolt with any encouragement from us, passed by. When Hungary revolted in 1956, our State Department sent a message to the Soviet Union that we do not look with favor on the formation of unfriendly governments on the borders of the Soviet Union. And Khrushchev got that message, and he moved his armies into Hungary. He was afraid to do it. He didn't know what would happen. He might before that. So that every time they're in a jam, as recently as last year, some forces in this country are powerful enough to get them out of the jam they're in. And that's the fact we have to face.
Well, that's a very good statement of that problem. I'm glad you brought that out. I possibly should have said some of those things in answer to Senator Lewis's question. And from our point of view, I guess it doesn't really matter whether they're evil forces conspiring to assist the communists in their efforts, as are some of those examples that you gave, or whether they were highly motivated humanitarianism, as the Hoover mission of feeding the Russians after World War I. From the net effect is it helped the Russians and saved them from collapse, or helped the communist system. So it is certainly true that there are powerful business interests which think they can survive no matter which side of the war they're on, and they want to make their deal and make their money. And we have to make sure that the policy is in the best interest of the United States of America, because that's what we're for. Oh, back to you, Clyde.
Phyllis, the next question I'm going to put to you is laid in my lap, dramatically. A couple of years ago, you know, my son was serving in Vietnam on the Cambodian border. I went over to visit him. Spent 2 weeks with him in the front line. On the way down, I went through Saigon and had the little Chief Justice of Vietnam, Justice Tran Minh Tiet, had a little banquet for me. He had been to Oklahoma City about 6 months before. I introduced him to my horses, and we had a great big friendly reunion over in Saigon. And after it was over, he and a citizen from India who was on the United Nations Peace Commission got me off in the corner and said, "General, what do you think of border dispute between Russia and China?" I said, "Well, Mr. Chief Justice, I think it is phony." He said, "What mean phony?" I said, "Well, it is a very clever propaganda strategy designed to use man's hope for peace as a weapon of war and to capture America between the belligerence of the Chinese and the craftiness of the Soviets." He said, "Well, that's almost what I mean, but not quite." Said, "We afraid border dispute between Russia and China be settled along Mississippi River." Now the question is, how can we avoid it with the stupid policies that we have followed strategically over the past 20 years?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, and of course, General Watts has stated the problem very well. He's been over to Vietnam and understands the problems of psychological warfare as well as Vietnam very well. Many people have, I think the American people realize the State Department has made one mistake after another, and if the election in 1952 meant anything at all, it meant a mandate from the American people to clean out the State Department, and nothing happened, the same old people. And I remember when I was in a caucus of delegates from Illinois, Ohio, and Wisconsin at the Miami Convention of the Republicans in 1968, and we were listening to candidate Richard Nixon, and he had question period, and somebody held up his hand and said, "Well, what are you going to do about those communists in the State Department?" And Nixon said, "You mean those people down in the woodwork?" I remember that expression very particularly, and heads all over the room, go up and down like this. That's exactly what we meant, those people down in the woodwork. And so he gave us the impression that he was not only going to change the tops, but the middle echelon people down the line who were making the policy and carrying on these disastrous mistakes. And then, of course, nothing happened. He didn't do anything about the State Department. As it turns out, though, he's kind of downgraded the State Department and given all the power to Kissinger, who is the second most powerful man. Yes, in the country. Kissinger not only runs foreign policy, but he also runs defense policy, and he also runs intelligence. He runs the three big categories of our government, and nobody's ever been so powerful. And he seems to have captivated the press, and very strong-minded, Nixon has accepted his policy, and it's been disastrous. And I agree with what Professor Rice said, that of course he was Rockefeller's hand-picked man. He worked for the Rockefellers before he went with Nixon, and he opposed Nixon's nomination. It was a very strange thing that by all the rules of politics, if there's anybody who should not have had that appointment, it was Henry Kissinger. And yet, lo and behold, he turns up running foreign policy, defense policy, and intelligence.
Phyllis, I have one more short comment here.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with these, but on several occasions coming back to the National War College, I've awakened about at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, saturated with frustration at our complete oblivious disinclination to recognize the facts of life. I put on paper with a dictaphone next to my bed 3 little papers: Fourth Dimensional Warfare, Strategy for Survival, and Privileged Sanctuaries. The first 2 got in the Congressional Record. The third, Privileged Sanctuaries, couldn't get in because on page 2 or 3 I had made an analysis there saying that the liberalite pundits had stated of General MacArthur that war is too dangerous to entrust to the generals. And the answer to that is, of course, that peace is too precious to entrust to the striped pants pansies in the State Department who have always given it away.
Very good.
Now, Mr. Kissinger apparently doesn't have striped pants, but don't you think he's followed more or less the same policies?
Yes, I certainly do. Thank you very much. Senator Lewis.
I think I'll pass.
Oh, don't pass. Say something else.
Well, I was over in Vietnam just a few weeks before General Watts was there, and my experience was that the only people over there who thought we could win, maybe who should win, but the people who thought we could win were men General Watts' age and myself. The captains and the lieutenants from there on down, most of them didn't think that we could win the war. I see here a brainwashing of an entire younger generation, including the military, and I'm wondering, Phyllis, if you subscribe to the conspiracy theory of history, if this is all an integrated part of a master overall plan, or if it is just some group of big businessmen that want to make money out of wheat deals.
I believe in the historical existence of conspiracies. I don't think that things just accidentally or spontaneously or coincidentally happen. And I think the complete and conclusive proof of that is Watergate. Now, it's very interesting. I watched Charles Colson on Face the Nation Sunday defending President Nixon on Watergate. And if he used the word conspiracy once, he used it no less than every other sentence. And it is really kind of fantastic that these people who don't think there's a communist conspiracy, who don't think there's any other kind of conspiracy, oh, there's a Watergate conspiracy. They know that exists. Now, to me, I don't believe in coincidence. I think people get together and plan things. And I think there are different conspiracies planned by different people to a certain extent interlock with each other. You have one group, you have the communist conspiracy, which is centered in the Kremlin, and they give their orders and they have their people under discipline. You have certain other groups that gather. You have the Council on Foreign Relations, which won't let other people come into their meetings. It absolutely conducts in secret and is run by a tight little group. You have the Bilderbergers, who are a very select group of some of the most powerful financial interests in the world. You have the people who have tried to put progressive education over on our people. And you have various political conspiracies of different kinds. Sure, people get together and plan things, and sometimes they are interlocking, sometimes they work in parallel course. I don't believe that there's one big boss somewhere who's calling all the shots, but I certainly do believe that there are conspiracies. Fred?
The senator always seems to ask a question that's in my mind. I say amen to what you and the senator said. There's a legal doctrine that those who've had any antitrust law cases are familiar with, and it's called the doctrine of conscious parallelism. The government in an antitrust case doesn't necessarily have to prove that they all met in this hotel room and that they agreed what the prices were going to be fixed for the coming year. They can show that those who violate the antitrust laws use conduct which is called conscious parallelism, that they conducted parallel courses which had the same result without having to prove that they met in this room and signed a document that we're going to do this for the coming year, conspiracy. So the same way is true, I think, that doctrine on the aiding world communism. You don't necessarily have to prove that the that certain big business interests met with the American Communist Party, and they plotted this course. But you can show that by conscious parallelism, their interests in this country, which were following a course of action which was exactly to the benefit of the Soviet Union and exactly to the harm of the United States of America, and that course of action was conscious and parallel to what is recommended in the Daily Worker and in Pravda and in Izvestia.
Yes. And you can also show that they, if it were simple mistakes, that they sometimes would have made a mistake that benefited the United States, just on the law of averages. But somehow, all of their actions had benefited the communists, and that can hardly be any mistake. If you're a mathematician or an engineer, you know that very often your data are plotted on a graph. And when you plot all your data on a graph, if the line goes like that, you can think, well, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a hit and miss collection of information. But if you plot your data on a graph and it goes in a straight line, you know that there had to be a plan that managed it in order to arrive at that solution. And that is why when we look at the nuclear striking power of our country and we see that the line goes in a perfectly straight line from 1962 down to the present time, and it never went up, it always went down, we know that it had to be an intellect that did it that way. And when we look at the Soviet Union and we see from 1962 to the present time it goes in a perfectly straight line from the bottom up to their power today, it had to be an intellect that had a motive and an objective in managing their country that way. Now, when we consider some of these things, they're a bit depressing. You know, you look into the future and you feel a bit overwhelmed. And this is because I know that this is a reaction on a lot of people, was the reason why I devoted most of last year to writing my latest book, which is called Mindszenty the Man. It is a biography of Cardinal Mindszenty of Hungary, who expresses everlasting anti-communism. And when I had the privilege of meeting with him about a year ago, at the age of 80, he is a tremendous inspiration to me. Even though at his advanced years and having spent 23 years of his life in various kinds of captivity, having been imprisoned both by the Nazis and the communists, he still has all his fight. He is still determined to spend his last ounce of energy in fighting the communists. He understands Nixon and Kissinger perfectly well. He's one of the greatest informed people on communist tactics and objectives. And this book is a very personal book which tells the story of his perseverance, which I hope you will buy out at one of the tables today for $2, and which I'll be very happy to autograph. It is a personal inspiration. It is a crutch to keep you going. And it's also because I believe that the crying need of our time today is leadership. I think all those great numbers of millions of people out there who are with their feet propped up in front of the television sets, they'll all come with us if we have the leaders. And this is the problem of developing the leaders. Now, as we look around at the leaders we've had in the last few years, it's a pretty miserable collection, and sometimes when we relied on some, they turned out to be bad. But as you look through history, I am convinced that great leaders are not people who are divinely anointed by God for their leadership role. They don't get a messenger from God to say, now you are a leader. A Joan of Arc is a rarity in all history, somebody who did see visions and hear voices. It doesn't usually happen this way. A leader is usually a very ordinary, uninspired person like anybody in this room who makes the decision within himself to accept the responsibility and to pay the price that leadership demands in terms of self-discipline and dedication. Anybody in this room can be a leader. It's making up your mind to do it. And this is why I wrote this book, Minzeni the Man. He came from a very plain family, but from his early days, he learned to accept and to pay the price that leadership demands. And that is why he is a leader and speaks as the symbol of opposition to communism to his dying breath. So I hope you will get the book, which is available out at one of the tables. And I hope also you'll pick up a free copy of my newsletter in the back. And if you'd like to have the set on the Equal Rights Amendment, I can make available a set of my 8 letters on that for $1, which you can write on the envelope and hand to me. And you can subscribe for $5 a year, and you'll get all my material on food, the SALT treaty, and all the rest. But make the responsibility. It isn't enough for you to just come here and listen to speeches and say, that was fine, he said it very well, now I'll go back and read some more books and pass out some more literature. There are lots of people doing that. But in this room, surely there are some of you who will make up your mind that you're not only going to believe the right things and you're not only going to pass out some literature, but you are going to be a leader in your community to do some part of this giant job that needs to be done if you and your family and all the rest of us are going to continue to enjoy the peace and freedom that we have known in America. Thank you very much.